Hey, greetings everyone. Welcome to u-nite, Unity Temple's weekly interspiritual service. I'm Reverend Nhien, one of the co-founders of this service. So I want to begin simply by saying that what interspirituality means to us here is that while here at Unity, we are both historically and culturally grounded in the teachings of Jesus, as opposed to the teachings about Jesus. The teachings of Jesus, such as the teachings of unconditional love, grace, and forgiveness, that we here actively embrace practices and principles from the world's religious and spiritual traditions, understanding that each of those traditions has something that we can learn from, if you will. So what interspirituality also means to us is that while we come together and I stand up here and share certain viewpoints, I very much share them from my personal perspective. And so there is no requirement that everyone come together to agree on the same thing. The idea is there's no dogma here, but we share simply for you to learn, to grapple with these ideas, and see what in your innate wisdom you would like to take on for your own, and to try these ideas out and live them out in your life. That's the invitation, if you will. So that's what interspirituality means to us. At root, my hope, our hope, is that your experience here is simply one of love, unity, and oneness. And so with that, I'm excited to say that we are in the fourth week of a I'm kind of moving how many weeks I want to do, a 6-week series on a book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. And so the journey we've been taking together consists in week 1, where my invitation in week 1, the part of the book that we were addressing in week 1 was called Awakening Consciousness. So in week 1, we examined this idea that perhaps you're not who you think you are. That the voices that narrate your daily life, the voices that you often try to discern among, that none of those is actually you, but that the real you is that consciousness that can witness the voice, that awareness or that presence. And so the beginning of awakening is awakening to the realization that rather than try to pick what's authentic among these different varied voices, the one that tells me go eat the cookie or don't eat the cookie, but that neither of them, none of those is actually the truth of your being. And that the more we separate from, the more we're able to connect to the awareness that can witness those things, the more we are grounded in the power of our authentic being. And so in week 2, Maka shared with us the journey of experiencing like energy. And what if it's true that all of life is just this vast, infinite field of energy, and that energy is the essence of your being. And if that's true, and this energy is infinite, this wellspring, then why is it that sometimes you feel a little bit more energized than others? Sometimes when there's a conversation that's talking about mundane things, your energy is like, bored, slow. Why does sometimes you feel completely overwhelmed and exhausted, and you don't know exactly why? It's not explained through your physical activity, but then suddenly your ex calls and you've been waiting for this phone call, and suddenly you're vibrant again, right? You're energized. So it wasn't physical, but something happened. And so we're looking at the way in which, what if there is this infinite wellspring of energy, but we block ourselves through our ideas about when we will open or not open to that, the ways we shut down. And then last week, I talked on the topic of freeing yourself, and this idea that what if each and every day as we wake up and we say, I'm going to choose to go to this store over that store. I'm going to choose to call this friend or not call that friend. That in these moments, oftentimes we think we are exercising free will. But what if, in these moments, if we haven't fully woken up consciously to this idea that we are that which is back of all these thoughts, that what if in those moments we are not actually choosing from the freest place, but instead are choosing from a certain pattern of emotion and thinking and behavior that is pretty predictable. And if we begin to recognize that pattern, we can begin to choose to live what we would call spiritually free. And then as we move into this week is about going beyond. And the idea behind this is really a reinforcement of everything that we have explored today. And it's the idea that what if we were to recognize these structures and constructs that have governed the way most of us have lived most of our lives and most of our days. That if we begin to recognize this, then we really can transcend these existing constructs of self and live from a freer, more expansive place. And it strikes me that it's important to note something very core to the unity teaching that gives us space for this. And the teaching is this, that we, that you, that each of us is fundamentally, essentially good, whole, and perfect. That the waking up to the true self is a good thing. I was talking to a friend who happened to come from a fundamental Christian background. I was like, why is it? I never understood, why is it that you don't like meditation? Or that he historically didn't. And when he explained to me, it made so much sense. If you think you're fundamentally bad, why would you turn inside and look within? You're going to have to go to an outer source, right? So that just blew my mind. It's like, oh, no wonder. So the difference of us saying here, we believe that the essence of being is love, is light, is wholeness, and perfection. And so our work here together, the ways we support each other in community and going beyond the ideas of who we think we should be, is to wake up to the realization that we are even better than what any moral code or prescription could actually cause us to be, if you will. That the throwing out of all that is the beginning of our liberation, not just as individuals, but as a collective into a more expansive way of being that is more light-filled and love-filled. So our mission here is no small mission, but we do it in small ways. And I'm going to explore some of the very sort of baby steps that each of us can take to live into this more expansive vision, not only for you as an individual, but for us as a world, to bring more light from within you out here. So a story is told of the prime minister of the Tang dynasty, one of them, that he was this national hero, had much fame and fortune because he was known not only as an excellent statesman, but also as this amazing military leader. And so he had, on the one hand, a lot of this pride in like who he was in the world, right? But at the same time, he considered himself to be sort of a devout Buddhist. And so in Buddhism, he kind of connected to the sense of humility, and he made regular visits to his favored Zen master locally. And so the story is told that usually every week he would go and visit with his Zen master and sit at the master's side and ask him these questions. And one day, as he sat with his Zen master, he asked this question. Your Reverence, he asked, what is egotism in Buddhism? what is egotism? And the Zen master's face immediately went bright red, and he shouted back in this most condescending and insulting tone. He said, "What kind of stupid question is that?" And in that moment, the prime minister was so taken aback, he was just numb for 1 second. And then in the next second, he could feel himself get sullen and angry. And of course, the Zen master then smiles at him and says, "That is egotism." Now, when I heard this story the first time, my first reaction to it was, I think, on the surface of it, this story to me is about the ways in which I have a self-concept. And when anyone does a single thing that defies, that would crack through sort of that self-concept, right? Like, I have this idea of my greatness. And if you're going to say something critical to me, that's going to challenge my idea of myself. And so we can take that story at one level to recognize that egotism is a way in which we have a self-concept that we need to defend. I want to take a look at this today, but go more deeply into it. Because when our self-concept is challenged from the outer world, we have this tendency, right, to get upset about it and maybe even to defend ourselves in it. But I would like to take this and take the characters in it today and make them all within our own consciousness. And so let's talk about that. So today I want to explore the idea that the false self, the egoic self, we know it, we're recognizing it because it requires defense and daily maintenance, whereas our true self does not. As A Course in Miracles says, what is real need not be defended. In our safety, our true safety, it says, lies in our defenselessness. So that's one clue to recognizing, are we operating out of the false egoic self, the personality, or are we operating out of the true self? And so as we explore that, we can look into, what are the ways in which, if we recognize this, that we can begin to move free and go beyond taking things personally? Because how many times have I taken something personally, and I tell myself I shouldn't take it personally, but that doesn't really help me any, to tell myself not to. So what are the ways that we could actually do some inner work in order to kind of move out or shift into this larger paradigm? And then related to that, within this part 4 of the book, Michael Singer talks about enlightenment. So let's explore enlightenment from this perspective. What does it actually mean? So those are the 3 points that we're going to be addressing today. So the first point is essentially this. The way Michael Singer addresses it in his book is he paints the story of us building a house. Now imagine that you feel separate in this world and you don't feel completely safe, right? Feel like there are things that you need to do to guard yourself from the challenges of life, the pain of life. And so you start to build a house, a structure. The structure, though, is not outside of you, it's in your head. So what if you think now that what you have built is vital for your well-being in the world? And I'll give you the most common example, which is always the story of my mother and me, and how when I was younger, I had a very daily experience of walking out from my bedroom into the kitchen, where my mom often was, and feeling like I was scanned from top to bottom, critiqued, so that I had to sort of make it before I could even leave the house. And only in later years did I come to realize that she did this out of her view of love, which is, if I critique you first, then the world will not reject you or critique you. Oh, as a kid, you do not know this. All you know is you fall really short of the mark of what you should look like and what you should be, like nails, hands, everything, and put together in a certain way. But I have to admit, as much personal growth as I had done for all these years, it wasn't until the last couple of years that I realized that my Enneagram type, my personality type on the Enneagram, this is the exact story of the type 1 perfectionist on the Enneagram, which is an internal story that if I maintain a really harsh inner critic, then I will do for myself exactly what my mom did for me, which is, if I critique myself on a daily basis, each morning, scan myself to make sure everything is in order. If it's not in order, you better not leave that house. But if you don't leave, you're going to be criticized because you're late, right? So this this like sabotaging sense inside. So as I realized that, I came to a deeper understanding of what it is that we see in order to protect ourselves from the outside world in certain ways. We develop these internal stories. The problem is not that we have these stories, but that over time, these tapes and stories that run through our minds, over time, we almost forget. It's like the picture that is in your own house that's been up for 15 years, and you don't even see it until the guest comes into the house and points out what the picture looks like, so you're so used to it, like you've taken for granted that it's there. And so what happens is this voice in my head all these years, I didn't even realize it was there. It was just guiding my every action, honing what I look like, what I say, what I'm prepared to say to each person each day. But I don't think there's something there. I just think it's me. So I use this example to invite you to consider, and I know some of you have been on this journey for a while, this journey of self-awareness, to say, when you get up in the morning, what's inside your house? What do you read on the walls? What are the quotes that you put up that impact your daily living? Those of us who study the Enneagram come to see that the Enneagram helps us to see the common patterns of our type. And the value of that is once we read about it, we're like, oh, I didn't realize that is on my wall. That is right in my kitchen every morning, And so if you consider the Enneagram, let's go through the Enneagram. For the type 1, like me, there's this story of, if you're not perfect, things aren't going to be okay. If you're not right, it's not going to be okay for you. If you're not diligent and hyper-responsible, then the world's going to fall apart. So these are some of the stories that govern the everyday actions of a type 1 before you get conscious. Type 2 on the Enneagram, unless you're helpful to others, you're not valuable. To have your own needs is actually a bad thing. And it's kind of shameful. It feels embarrassing to admit that you have a need from someone else. So it's not okay to have needs. So to even assert yourself, to assert what you want, feels incredibly selfish. That's what's written on the inside of your house before you walk out each day. And if you're a 3 on the Enneagram, chances are there's a story about doing enough, accomplishing enough. A story that drives you each day to not attend to what you're actually feeling in your own heart, to who you even are, but instead to drive you to show up in the world, to accomplish what society or what your partner, what others have said is going to determine your value. What's written on the wall inside your home before you walk out? If you're a type 4, the interesting thing about this is it can actually be sort of reversed, right? Whereas, in the story of this prime minister, he had a highfalutin sense of self that would be violated if someone said otherwise, that you're less than in any way, that someone called you stupid. The issue with the type 4 on the Enneagram is there's an association, an identification with somehow myself is more valuable because I'm particularly wounded. That I'm actually identified with my suffering. My suffering will protect me. And so I get locked in this pattern of I can't be joyful. To be joyful isn't even real. That's like those superficial people out there who are joyful. If you just look at me, if you look at the world, how could you be joyful? Says that type, and the story goes on. And so the 5 on the Enneagram, it's like understanding and knowing enough. Like I'm not going to know enough, right? Like, so I'm going to research more before I even try and venture into the world, into relationship. That's my story. That's what's inside. It dictates, and I don't even know it. All I feel is that I want to read more. That's the feeling. What I don't realize is that this voice is so old in me, I don't even recognize it as something distinct. It just feels like this is who I am. I like to read. I don't like to go out and actually do things or talk to real people, And like there's something about that because that's complicated and messy. And so I will do it because I need human contact, but it exhausts me. And I'll go back to the books that feed me and the reading and the research that feeds me. And if I'm a 6 on the Enneagram, then I have issues around safety and security. And so instead of just really coming out and just naturally having a free flow of vibrancy in the world, what am I going to do? I'm going to scan for potential danger. I'm going to scan and check to see if you are trustworthy or not, And depending on the type of Enneagram type 6 I am, I'm going to test you to see, or I'll just back off and stay kind of huddled or paralyzed in my fear. And so I might not even leave that house if I'm that type. If I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, then I'm actually identified with having fun and gaining these, multitude of experiences. So what is forbidden for me in that, if I'm that type, is that I'm not allowed to have negative feelings, and nor are you, and I don't even know how to handle it. So as soon as you go negative, I will paint it positive, right? I will paint that house positive for you. Let me paint over your sadness, right? Says the 7. Let me paint over my own. So I'm not letting myself live the full spectrum of life, because somewhere along the lines I've said, this is not okay. It's not okay to feel despair or sadness or darkness or depression. And if I can't escape it in other ways, I will escape that in my mind just by dreaming up new and exciting ideas constantly, chronically. And I don't even know I'm doing this, right? Just unconsciously. If I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, then I'm so connected to control and issues of control and power. And so I don't even realize the ways in which I dominate the room, that I think about my world as dominating and not being dominated. And so in that, I lose any sense of vulnerability or ability to connect And so that heart place in me that seeks love and seeks connection doesn't get met. And I don't even know why until I become conscious. And that's a thing about the tape that becomes ourselves. Like, this house is myself, and I can't see it. And so it's like, I'm so frustrated. It's like I'm trying to relate to people, but I don't know why. I can't see how I always overpower situations. I can't see how I'm controlling and domineering, right? I just show up that way because I don't see it as me. And then finally, the 9 on the Enneagram, that type that is so occupied with harmony and peace that if the outer circumstances of the world are not on a daily basis, then I'm going to kind of idealize and live in my idealized world. I will refrain from asserting myself in any ways in which it might be a view different from those I love. And in that, I'm not able to live in full integrity because of my inability to show up and assert in any way that might create conflict in the world. And so, if you go back to the story of the Prime Minister, if you hear this tape in your head, like, wow, that's a stupid question. Consider that that's not coming from outside you. Consider that we, in different ways, do this kind of counseling of ourselves, advising of ourselves on a daily basis as we censor the way we live because we say, that's not okay. That's not okay. I want it, but that's not okay because I would be unsafe. That's not okay because I would feel like a selfish person. That's not okay because I can't be vulnerable because the world isn't safe and they're bad people and I have to keep up all of this protection. Or that's not okay because I need to know that I'm successful in the world, and anything that defies the notion of being a successful person in the world is going to violate, is going to tear down my house, right? And so the idea is that we start to recognize, if we take a step back and start to pay attention more, pay attention. What are you saying to yourself? The Sufi poet Hafiz says the words you speak become the house you live in. The words you speak inside your head become the house you live in. And what happens for us over time, if we've gotten this far, I was like, oh, I've made it to this age, so my house is pretty good, you know? Why is Nhien trying to shatter my house? It's like, it's decent, right? I'm here, I made it. I have a few friends, you know, I've got a decent livelihood. It usually takes a trauma in our lives, right? Hitting bottom and starting a 12-step program. Possibly divorce, the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one. For us to have an experience that could be so traumatic and painful that it's like, wow, that storm out there, the house I constructed did not protect me. And in those times, as a minister, those times of transition, the times of deep pain, the times of trauma, are the most ripe times for growing into a deeper knowing of our wholeness. Because when the shutter's broken open because of the storm outside, what most of us do in our reaction is we get upset and we go and we repair that shutter, right? Instead, if we instead let the house fall down, then we would see the ways in which inside our house we use artificial light, but the world is lit up outside, and we don't even know it because we think we need the protection of this self. And so, when we start to see, maybe because our life paradigm has broken down, it doesn't work for us anymore. Or maybe we just get an internal wake-up call that says, you know what? There's something more to my life that I haven't been living. Whatever it is that calls us to the spiritual path that says, wake up. Wake up, there's more out there. But the more out there is because there's more in here that hasn't been let out, right? That the light is within. And whatever drives us to that place, the invitation is on a daily basis, whether it's a big trauma or a little pain, to use each and every upset, not to keep repairing our house, but instead to let the upset shatter who we thought we were, so that the truth of our being, the light of our souls, can fully emerge. For instance, many of you here already know that I've been in a transition in relationship, and just Tuesday is when I got our official divorce order papers finalized. Major transition. So on Tuesday, so that the reality of all that came to bear. And being around very conscious people, for the most part, this journey of transition and of divorce hasn't been that tumultuous. It's actually been pretty grace-filled and peace-filled. But it so happens that after several months of not getting a manicure, I decided on Friday to go in and get a manicure. Now, the thing about getting manicures is it is stereotypical, but there are a lot of Vietnamese people who work at these places, right? And I do have a funny story around that, because I walk in. I'm always a little nervous because I'm like, should I just tell them I'm Vietnamese and I can hear them and I can understand what they're saying? Because they're talking about the customers. And here it was. There I sat down. She looks at me, and I even did this. I even kind of said, "What's your name?" Thinking if I tell her my name, she will know I'm Vietnamese. But I did that, and there was no light shining in her eyes. I was like, she does not know. So she started talking in Vietnamese to the guy next to her. Started talking about the customer next to us, and I'm like, oh shoot. And talking about, a customer that was coming in, she's like, yeah, that the gals that are coming in, they don't tip so well. They're kind of cheap. And I'm like, oh, don't say anything about me, So I'm sitting here, okay. But here's the thing. Because she's Vietnamese, and because in our culture, there's this big thing about, the most important questions all my parents' friends ever ask me is, are you married and do you have kids, right? And so I'm sitting here going, okay, do I want to have a conversation with this woman or not? And so I sat there for the longest time, and then finally, at the very end, I'm glad I did, but something happened to where I just kind of spilled the beans and said something in Vietnamese, and she's like, oh, you're Vietnamese, and she was so excited, and so she starts going on in Vietnamese, and she's just like, oh, I'm going to give you an extra layer of nail polish, we treat each other, so it went off like this. But then of course the question comes of are you married? And I had this something about her, she's probably my mother's age, sort of represented that old way of thinking, the story, right? The self-concept of in my family, what makes you a good person are essentially three things that I am not. A doctor, right? A doctor, because it's Vietnamese families. Married, with children, you know, and so I'm sitting here, and of course, all her questions, you're divorced, you know, like, do you have children? No, I don't have children, you know, and it was just this moment of like, oh crap, you know, just like, here I was feeling good about myself, and like this idea of like what makes me good enough was like right in my face, like on Friday. And it is funny that I can laugh at it, because there was a day when I could not. There was a day when what we are taught we need to be, unconsciously or consciously, it's like either you need to be, for some of us, you need to be strong. It's not about success in the world. It's like, be a strong person. You got to take care of the whole family. You know, whatever it is that we must be, and the corollary of what we're not allowed to be. You know, that we're not allowed to be these other things. Like in certain families, it's like, you got to be strong for all of us, right? Really? I'm 7 years old. Right? But yet so many of us have that burden. As a minister, you know, I journey with people through these stories. Or you're not allowed to have needs. Oh, it's a family of 15 kids. Who are you to have a need? Right? That we're taught these things early on, and then we build these constructs, these houses that like, okay, well, if that's true, then my house is going to be pretty freaking strong. Right? Or my house is going to be very refined and perfect, immaculate. What does your house look like? And what if your house is not, while your house can protect yourself against some of the pain of the world, just as we said last week, that perfectionism, according to Brené Brown, we think is a badge of honor. I'm a perfectionist in this, but it's actually a shield that immunizes us from the pain of feeling less than. So what if, yes, your house does protect you from some of the elements of the world and the things you face, but really at root, it's actually also keeping you from the light that is freely available out in the world. What if, from a unity perspective, there's only one power and one presence active in this world and in the universe? God, the good, in all, through all, and over all. And if that's true, what could you possibly, truly need to protect your identity from when love embraces you, when that's all that is? When yourself, when myself can actually have relationships end and I'm still okay and lovable? What if I'm sometimes not strong at all and that's actually more than okay? What if I can have certain needs, and these needs can be different from the needs of my family members and friends? And what if that's not in opposition to the universe? What if that's okay? What if all of my being, what if the truth and the complexity and the diversity of who I am is all really okay? Can I trust that? If I can, then what happens is this. In a week, just my week, 1 week, you have things that are like, woohoo, you know, that like buttress your sense of self, and there are things that cause you to question it. Like, what if all the stuff that happened to me, I started to just let myself experience it and not defend? Here's an example. What if you're critiqued by a coworker, a partner, a family member, a stranger, and instead of, when you feel the critique, go around and go, is she right? You know, like try to get support and rallying around like who you think you are. I'm an unselfish person, am I not? You know, instead of that, let yourself feel the feeling, the experience, wide open to that. Let yourself feel Did you just have a life trauma, a big thing happen that feels devastating? Watch yourself. See what you're trying to add on to your house to make you feel okay about what just happened, instead of simply feeling the feelings of grief, loss, anger, and in some cases for us, joy. Let me touch on that a bit because that feels a little irregular. But I know plenty of people for whom, if their family has suffered a lot over generations, that there is guilt related to success and joy. That there's something that feels like a betrayal to my legacy because others I love are suffering and I'm happy or I'm successful. And so that could be actually a thing that we don't let in. We bar the doors. Let me sit in the house of my suffering because in this house, my family lives with me. Right? And it can feel like a betrayal to go outside. And so I invite you to consider even just one way in which you know in your gut, I can't tell you what it is, but I suspect that you already know. I'm not living my fullest life. I'm not as vibrant as I could be because this is a story I tell myself about who I should be, what a good mother does, what a good friend does, right? What a good employee does, what a good boss does. Whenever we have these sort of generalizations, that's a clue, that's a structure, and that's not organic living. That's not living at its most vibrant level. So, what if, though we talk in terms of growth here a lot, I want to be very careful to say that at one level, I don't believe we need to grow, right? Of Course in Miracles again, and also Rumi has said that, your task in life, your task is not to seek for love. Your task is not to seek for love, but to simply find all the barriers to love and remove them, right, essentially. And likewise, with enlightenment, I want to share, is a very special thing, says Michael Singer. But in truth, just like with love, one should not focus on it. Focus instead on the walls of your own making that are blocking the light. Of what purpose is it to build walls that block the light and then strive for enlightenment? You can get out simply by letting everyday life take down the walls you hold around yourself. You simply don't participate in supporting, maintaining, and defending your fortress. And so here we talk about waking up. We don't need to where's enlightenment and go find it, go read about it. If we believe that in truth we are light within ourselves, then all we need to do is look at the ways that we defend against it. And we identify them so easily because it's any time that we feel wounded by anything outside ourselves and that we feel like we need to guard against something, then we know we have a wall. Then we know we've built a structure. And so if in that moment we instead don't try to take the behaviors that keep us from feeling that feeling. For instance, if I feel horrible, that, oh my gosh, I just gave this horrible sermon and I'm at home and I'm crouched in, that if I feel that way, what I could do is start working on next week's sermon right away, and start researching it a little bit earlier, and have it done early enough. I can even have friends to check. I'm going to do the behaviors that are going to keep me from feeling the feelings of absolute shame, the sense of degradation, but if instead I let that in, then my wall's down already. That thing shattered my wall and I can keep it down. And as I've done things like that, let stuff in, all I know in my life is that I am freer to live less controlled and inhibited, less censored, more vibrantly, more open to the spontaneity of the moment, such that the gifts of life are more readily available to me in any moment. The synchronicities that inevitably happen in the oneness that we are. I can sense into them. I can be available to them. But not if I'm like, heads down, work, right? Focus here. This is what you must do. This is what your storyline says. And so, enlightenment, we do it by taking down the walls. And I'm going to close with a quick comment simply about how we might do that. For a type 1 like me, like in our groups, it's funny to see the perfectionists all like, you know who you are. Unless you have something brilliant and insightful and well-planned in your head to say, you will not raise your hand, right? Like you will not speak out unless like you know you're right. Like there's a lot of just pre-planning. So what do? One baby step is you show up and you share and you speak even before you have it all together. You walk out the door. This is how bad, admitting how bad my complex is, because I was called fat and overweight all my life. It wasn't until this last year that I ever wore shorts in public, like just a regular, other than like jogging outside. Why? Because I had the story. Like, oh my God, how horrifying. Like I would horrify everyone. I mean, that was the story in my head. So what would be the step? Well, I'm gonna put those shorts on. It may seem little, but it's huge. For a type 2 in the Enneagram that's like, oh, I'm not allowed to have needs. Oh, have you tried saying no to someone you care about? Say no to someone you care about, like as a giver on the Enneagram. So one very concrete thing that each of us can do, you don't even have to know the Enneagram to know this, because I suspect you already know this thing that you're like, I want to do this, but I can't, right? It's just a little thing about how you're used to showing up. And what if this week you could? What if this week you could take a little baby step and say, oh, maybe I will speak up for myself this week. Maybe I will let myself stay at home and be, quote, lazy if I'm an achiever type, right? Maybe, even though I still have a story, my house says, no vulnerability, people are cruel, people are harsh, that maybe this week I will share from my heart. This week, that what we can do is take the step that seems like the step that we cannot take and that we should not take. And by doing that, then we start to then let ourselves feel the brunt of the storm of life that we were protecting ourselves from, right? But once we felt it, then we're free from living sort of in defense of it, if you will. And we get it that we can actually weather any storm, that life does not have a single experience that we cannot handle, that life is actually for us and just waiting to bless us. If we only knew that we could weather the storms, that we didn't need the kind of protection that we think that we need. And so the next quote there. We are constantly trying to hold it all together. If you really want to see why you do things, then don't do them and see what happens. That's my invitation this week. Don't do them and see what happens. And I'll close with probably my favorite quote from the entire book. And it talks about going beyond. I'll read the longer version. So would you like to go beyond? To go beyond like the limitations of your personality and who you thought you have been, whom your parents have told you should be, who even your current family and friends sort of reinforce you as. Like if you want to go beyond, he asks, would you like to feel no edges, no walls? Imagine a comfort zone that is so expanded that it could easily fit the entire day, no matter what happens. The day unfolds and the mind doesn't say anything. You simply interact with the day with a peaceful, fully inspired heart. And if your edges happen to get hit, like mine regularly do, the mind doesn't complain. It just passes through. Oh, look at that. That was a storm. Oh, look at that sunny weather. It just happens, and life moves through us, and we live vibrantly, fully, the spectrum that is the lusciousness of the oneness of life living through each and every one of us. So he says, it just passes through. This is how great beings live. When you are trained like a great athlete to immediately relax through your edges when they get hit, then it's all over. You realize that you will always be fine. Nothing can ever bother you except your edges, and now you know what to do with them. You end up loving your edges because they point your way to freedom. All you have to do is constantly relax and lean into them. Then one day, when you least expect it, you fall through into the infinite. And that is what it means to go beyond. Going beyond the walls of your own house. You allow yourself to relax into the infinite light that is both within you and all around you.